The rain drummed against the windows of the modest apartment as Sarah Chen stared at the formal letter in her trembling hands. The law firm's letterhead seemed to mock her as she read the words that would change everything she thought she knew about her family. Her grandmother's will had been read, and according to the document, Sarah, who had spent every weekend for 15 years caring for Grandma Rose, had been left nothing, everything, including the thriving chain of bakeries that Rose had built from scratch, had gone to Sarah's younger brother Marcus and her mother, Linda. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Don't bother coming to the reading tomorrow. Rose made it clear you weren't responsible enough to handle any part of the business. Some people just aren't cut out for success, sweetheart." The words hit like physical blows. Sarah had been the one mixing dough at 5 a.m. during summer breaks, learning recipes passed down through generations, studying business management in college specifically to help modernize the bakeries. Marcus had shown up maybe a dozen times in 15 years, usually only when he needed money for his latest get-rich-quick scheme. That evening, Sarah sat in her small kitchen, surrounded by the recipe notebooks she'd meticulously copied from her grandmother's collection. Each page contained not just ingredients and instructions, but memories. Rose's weathered hands guiding hers as they shaped mooncakes for Chinese New Year. The pride in her grandmother's eyes when Sarah had suggested the online ordering system that had doubled their revenue during the pandemic. The next morning brought a call from Marcus, his voice slurring slightly. Whether from alcohol or his usual arrogance, Sarah couldn't tell. "Hey sis, heard you're upset about the will." "Look, Mom explained everything to Grandma Rose. You've always been too idealistic, you know? Running a business takes real grit. But hey, if you want to apply for a job at one of the bakeries, I'm sure we could find something entry-level for you." Sarah hung up without a word. The betrayal felt complete, not just from Marcus, who had always been Linda's golden child, but from her mother, who had apparently spent years poisoning Rose's mind against her elder daughter. The woman who had worked 2 jobs to put herself through college, who had never asked for anything except the chance to carry on Rose's legacy, had been deemed not good enough. For the next 6 months, Sarah watched from the sidelines as Marcus and Linda took control of Rose's bakeries. She found work at a small accounting firm, her business degree put to use in ways she'd never intended. Meanwhile, the local newspaper ran glowing profiles of the new generation, taking over the beloved bakery chain. Marcus gave interviews about his vision for expanding the business, while Linda positioned herself as the wise matriarch guiding her son's ambitions. But Sarah noticed things others missed. The online reviews began shifting from 5 stars to 3, then 2. Longtime customers complained about changes in recipes, reduced portion sizes, and staff who seemed undertrained and unhappy. The bakeries that had once been gathering places for the community, where Rose had known every regular customer by name, began to feel corporate and cold. Sarah's former co-workers from her summer jobs started reaching out to her quietly. Jenny, who had managed the flagship location for 8 years, was in tears during their coffee meeting. "They fired Mrs. Liu yesterday," she whispered. She'd been with Rose for 20 years, knew all the traditional recipes by heart. Marcus said they're streamlining operations and don't need so many senior staff members. "Sarah, they're using frozen dough now instead of making it fresh daily. Your grandmother would be heartbroken." The changes accelerated. Marcus began licensing the Rose's Bakery's name to cheaper suppliers, flooding grocery stores with mass-produced versions of Rose's signature items. The authentic hand-pulled noodles that had made the deli counter famous were replaced with prepackaged alternatives. Linda defended every decision in the local press, claiming they were modernizing for efficiency and bringing Rose's recipes to a wider audience. Sarah could only watch as the empire her grandmother had built with love and dedication was systematically dismantled. She found herself driving past the original bakery location sometimes, remembering weekend mornings spent learning the difference between various flours, the precise timing needed for perfect bread, the way Rose would smile when a customer's face lit up tasting a fresh almond cookie. The breaking point came 8 months after the will reading. Sarah was working late at the accounting firm when her phone rang. It was Mr. Patterson, Rose's longtime lawyer, his voice heavy with regret and something else, urgency. Sarah, I need to see you immediately. There's something about your grandmother's will that there's been a mistake, a significant mistake. Her heart pounding, Sarah drove through the rain to Patterson's office. The elderly lawyer looked haggard, papers scattered across his desk. When she entered, he gestured to a chair and poured himself a glass of water with shaking hands. Your grandmother came to see me 6 months before she died, he began slowly. She was very clear about her intentions. She wanted you to inherit the bakery, Sarah. She'd been watching you all those years, saw your dedication, your understanding of what the business meant to her and to the community. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. I don't understand. The will, the will I read was not the one Rose signed. Patterson's voice was barely a whisper. Your mother came to see me 2 weeks after Rose passed. She presented what she claimed was a more recent will, dated just 3 days before Rose's death. The handwriting looked authentic. The signature seemed genuine. I had it verified by experts Linda recommended. Everything checked out. But Patterson reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. Rose gave me this to hold, with strict instructions that if anything ever seemed suspicious about her will, I should open it. Sarah, your grandmother was sharper than any of us realized. She suspected Linda might try something like this. Inside the envelope was a videotape and a handwritten letter in Rose's distinctive script. Patterson inserted the tape into an old player, and suddenly Rose's voice filled the room. She was sitting in her kitchen, the same kitchen where Sarah had learned to bake, speaking directly to the camera. If you're watching this, it means my suspicions about Linda were correct. Sarah, my dear granddaughter, I want you to know that you were always my choice to carry on what we built together. Every decision I made in the real will was made with love and the certainty that you understand not just the recipes, but the heart of what these bakeries represent to our community. The video went on to detail Rose's actual wishes. The bakeries were to go to Sarah, along with detailed instructions for maintaining their authenticity and community focus. She had also left specific provisions for longtime employees and charitable contributions to local organizations. Marcus was to receive a trust fund that would provide comfortable living, but couldn't be liquidated for risky investments, and Linda was left the house and a substantial cash inheritance. But most importantly, Rose had anticipated the possibility of fraud. She had secretly filmed herself destroying what she called practice drafts of her will, documents that looked official but were never signed. The video showed her burning papers and explaining that she'd caught Linda photographing these drafts during a visit. Linda always underestimated me, Rose said sadly in the video. She thought because I was old, I was foolish. But I built this business by paying attention, by watching people, by understanding their hearts. I knew she would never accept that I chose Sarah, and I prepared for what she might do. Patterson explained that Rose had also secretly installed security cameras in her home during her final month. The footage from the night before her death showed Linda entering with a key, going through Rose's papers, and taking the real will. Additional footage from the following morning showed Linda returning with a forged document. Why didn't you investigate sooner? Sarah asked, her voice barely steady. Patterson's shame was evident. Linda was very convincing. She had the experts confirm the handwriting, and frankly, I was focused on getting through what I thought was a straightforward estate settlement. It wasn't until I started hearing rumors about changes at the bakeries that I began to question things. Rose specifically asked me to watch how her legacy was being handled, and when I saw what was happening, he gestured helplessly. I opened the envelope. The confrontation came the next morning. Sarah, accompanied by Patterson and 2 police officers, arrived at the flagship bakery where Linda and Marcus were meeting with potential investors about franchising opportunities. The morning rush crowd watched in stunned silence as Patterson announced that the will they had been operating under was fraudulent. Linda's face went through a progression of emotions: shock, fear, defiance, and finally a cold calculation. This is ridiculous, she declared. That old woman was clearly losing her mind. This supposed real will is obviously something Sarah cooked up because she couldn't accept that she wasn't the favorite. But the evidence was overwhelming. The handwriting analysis of the forged will, when conducted by independent experts, revealed subtle inconsistencies. The security footage was clear and damning. Most telling of all was Rose's video testimony, which demonstrated an understanding of family dynamics and business operations that was clearly lucid and well reasoned. Marcus, who had been unusually quiet during the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Mom, you said Grandma Rose had changed her mind about Sarah. You said she told you directly that she wanted us to have the business." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's carefully constructed story began to crumble as Marcus realized he had been manipulated as thoroughly as everyone else. The legal proceedings that followed were swift but brutal. The evidence of fraud was so clear that Linda's lawyer advised her to negotiate a plea agreement rather than go to trial. Marcus, who could prove he had believed his mother's lies, was spared criminal charges but had to return all assets that rightfully belonged to Sarah. The real justice, however, came in the aftermath. As news of the fraud spread through the community, the full extent of Linda's manipulation became clear. Former employees came forward with stories of how she had badmouthed Sarah to Rose, claiming that Sarah had been stealing from the registers or was planning to sell the business to corporate chains. Longtime customers shared how Linda had gradually isolated Rose from people who might have contradicted her narrative. Sarah's first day as the rightful owner of Rose's Bakeries was bittersweet. She walked through the flagship location, noting all the changes that needed to be reversed, the relationships that needed to be rebuilt, the trust that needed to be earned back. Jenny and several other longtime employees had returned within hours of the news breaking, eager to help restore what had been lost. The work was enormous. Sarah had to rebuild relationships with suppliers who had been alienated by Marcus's cost-cutting measures. She had to retrain staff who had been taught to prioritize speed over quality. Most challenging of all, she had to win back customers who had watched their beloved neighborhood bakery transform into something they no longer recognized. But Sarah had something Marcus and Linda had never possessed. She understood what Rose had really been trying to preserve. It wasn't just a business or even a collection of recipes. It was a place where Mrs. Chen from 3 blocks over could count on her weekly moon cake order being remembered, where teenagers could earn their first paycheck while learning the value of hard work, where the display case wasn't just filled with baked goods, but with edible expressions of love and tradition. Within 6 months, the online reviews climbed back to 4 stars, then 5. The frozen dough was gone, replaced by the sight and smell of fresh baking that had once filled the early morning air. The hand-pulled noodles returned to the deli counter, made by Mrs. Liu, who Sarah had immediately rehired with a formal apology and a raise. The most profound moment came on a quiet Tuesday morning, almost exactly a year after the will reading. Sarah was in the kitchen before dawn, preparing the day's bread, when she felt a presence she hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't supernatural, just the deep sense of connection to something larger than herself. The feeling that Rose's hands were guiding hers as they shaped the dough. Marcus had moved across the country, using his trust fund to start fresh somewhere. His story wasn't known. He had sent Sarah a letter, simple and heartfelt. "I'm sorry. I should have known Mom was lying, should have seen what you meant to Grandma Rose. I hope someday you can forgive us both." Linda faced a different fate. The criminal charges had been reduced to a fine and community service, but the social consequences in their small community were severe. The woman who had spent decades positioning herself as a pillar of respectability found herself isolated, her reputation destroyed by her own actions. She had moved to a retirement community 2 towns over, effectively exiled from the life she had tried so hard to control. But Sarah's justice wasn't in her mother's downfall. It was in the restoration of what Rose had built. It was in the smile of recognition when long-lost customers returned to find their favorite items back on the shelves. It was in the tears of joy from employees who had been rehired. It was in the knowledge that her grandmother's true wishes were finally being honored. On the first anniversary of taking over the bakeries, Sarah stood in the original kitchen, holding the last letter Rose had left for her. One Patterson had been instructed to deliver exactly 1 year after the truth came out. The envelope was marked simply, "For Sarah, when the work begins." Inside, Rose's handwriting was as clear and strong as ever. "My dearest granddaughter, if you're reading this, it means you have weathered the storm I knew was coming. Your mother's actions hurt me deeply, but they could not surprise me. I chose you not because you were perfect, but because you understood that what we do here is about more than profit or pride. You understood that every loaf of bread, every birthday cake, every batch of cookies carries with it the love we put into the making. The business is yours now, truly yours, and I know you will fill it with the same joy and care that filled my heart every day I worked beside you. Remember, the secret ingredient was never in the recipes. It was in the love. You have always had that in abundance." Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it in the recipe box that now held place of honor on the kitchen counter. Around her, the familiar sounds of a bakery coming to life filled the morning air. Ovens heating, mixers turning, the gentle rhythm of work that connected her to generations of women who had fed their communities with their own hands. She thought of Linda sometimes, usually with sadness rather than anger. Her mother had possessed everything necessary for happiness: a successful family business, a daughter who would have worked beside her, a mother-in-law who had grown to respect her over the years. But fear and greed had twisted her vision until she could see only what she might lose, never what she already had. Marcus sent postcards occasionally from his new life in Oregon. He was working as a manager at a small restaurant, learning the industry from the ground up. His messages were brief but genuine, and Sarah sensed he was finding peace in honest work, far from the schemes and shortcuts that had defined his earlier years. The bakeries thrived under Sarah's leadership, but more importantly, they had returned to their role as community anchors. Sarah had instituted a program where teenagers from struggling families could earn scholarships through part-time work and mentorship. She had partnered with local schools to teach traditional baking techniques to students interested in culinary arts. The business grew, but it grew with purpose. Each expansion carefully planned to maintain the personal touch that had always been Rose's trademark. On quiet mornings, when Sarah arrived before anyone else and began the day's preparations in solitude, she sometimes spoke aloud to her grandmother. She shared her plans for new recipes, her concerns about difficult business decisions, her joy in small victories, like a perfectly risen loaf or a customer's grateful smile. "You were right about karma, Grandma," she would whisper to the warm kitchen air. "It doesn't always look like what we expect, and it doesn't always come quickly, but truth has a way of rising, just like good bread. You just have to be patient, keep working with love, and trust that what's meant to be will find its way." The rain outside had stopped hours ago, and golden morning light was beginning to stream through the kitchen windows. Sarah smiled as she heard the first employees arriving, their cheerful voices calling out greetings as they prepared for another day of serving their community. She tied her apron more securely and reached for the recipe box, ready to continue the work that was never really about inheritance or ownership, but about love expressed through the simple act of feeding people well. In the end, karma hadn't needed Sarah's help or intervention. It had simply required her to remain true to what Rose had taught her, that dignity, perseverance, and love would always triumph over manipulation and greed. The justice she had received wasn't revenge. It was the opportunity to honor her grandmother's memory and carry forward a legacy that had always been about nourishing both body and soul. The morning rush would begin soon, and Sarah Chen, rightful heir, dedicated granddaughter, and keeper of Rose's legacy, was ready.